We've spent a lot of time discussing the human business and the Christian business plan's evaluation of where that business is, what's good about it, and what's not so good about it, what needs to change. And in that process, we spent a great deal of time understanding the difference between our love and our good and God's love and God's good, to see that they really aren't quite the same. That what we have is love and it is good and needs to be acknowledged as such, but it's not sustainable. It tends to be selfish and not universal. And we compared this to the absolute selfless love of God as manifested in Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, showing us what God means by love as opposed to what we mean by love. Now that we understand this difference, we can understand God a little better as we take a look at His Word, at how He has communicated to us. Because if we look at His Word, and we start to read the words of Jesus, see the actions of Jesus, read the words of God throughout the Bible, and we understand them with our context, with our love and our good to which we are accustomed, there is a good chance we will misunderstand those words, because we will remake God in our image. We'll understand those words not as He means them, and His actions not as He means them, but as we have understood them in our context. And that's nothing abnormal. We do that all the time. It's why we have so many arguments and disagreements. In fact, at work, that's one of the things I'm always sorting out among my management team, is how to communicate with their peers and with their employees. So somebody says something, and they say it from their context, from their understanding, from their life experiences, and how they mean it. And they think they've communicated just fine. But we hear it, and we hear the exact same words, but we interpret them based upon our context and our life experience and our definitions. And there's a good chance we're going to take it differently than the person meant it. And the art of communication becomes stepping inside the other person's head, to step outside of our context and to start stepping into their context to understand how they meant it. It's the same thing with God. That if God is communicating to us from His context and His mindset of eternal, selfless, unconditional love, but we're reading those words and interpreting those actions from our generally selfish context, we're going to see God as someone who is mean, as someone who is unfair, as someone who is oppressive, because we will misunderstand His intentions and His actions and His words. When we now begin to understand God's mindset of selfless love and compensate for our mindset of selfish love, we can see His words more clearly. Now, with that background, it's time for us to crack into perhaps the epitomal exposition of Christianity given by Jesus Himself in the Sermon on the Mount. We'll pick this up in Matthew 5, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, and right at verse 1. And we'll see this is a very, very dense section. There's so much here. And as we expound it, for those of you who are coming from a Christian background, I hope that you'll see this in a very different way than you saw it before. So in Matthew 5 and in verse 1, "And when He saw the multitudes, He went up on the mountain, and after He sat down, His disciples came to Him." Now, the setting right there is very important, as we're going to see, that Jesus goes up to the mountain to deliver this service, and with this sermon. Why? Because it's very, very symbolic, and it harkens back to Moses. When Moses goes up into the mountain on Mount Sinai and receives the law from God. And we're going to see that the subject of law and commandments is very, very important here, and that there's going to be a very new take, a new presentation about law. And hence Jesus goes up to the mountain as Moses went up to the mountain. But now Jesus becomes the new lawgiver. So He goes up to the mountain, He sits down, and His disciples come around Him. And opening His mouth, He began to teach them. And the first things we see, as we might expect now, understanding the mind of God and selfless love, are blessings upon not those who are self-willed and domineering and looking for number one and successful in the world and getting what they want, but rather blessings in selfless terms. Blessing upon those who put others before self, who choose peace, who choose mercy instead of extracting justice and doing what is fair for themselves. So he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle or the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Those of us who choose peace, looking out for others, become like God, sons, children of God, in His image. So, immediately we see these issues of selflessness. Well, we'll come to see so much more. Continuing on in verse 17 of Matthew 5, Jesus says, "Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill." So now we start to see, and we'll see even more, why this setting on the mountain, why this discussion of law, of a new law, and a new way of looking at things. So we're going to see this is not to do away with law, but to give it its full meaning. Now, I need to establish just a little bit of context here for those unfamiliar with life in Judaism at the time of Christ. That in the world of Judaism, there was a fanatical obsession with the law, and for very good and very understandable reasons. Many hundreds of years earlier, the nation of Judah had been taken captive by the Babylonians. They were sent into exile, a brutal, brutal exile, where they saw their temple destroyed, they saw their capital, Jerusalem, destroyed. They saw their leaders, eviscerated, and their eyes plucked out of the king. Just a brutal oppression as the Babylonians carried them out of the land to a foreign land to destroy their identity intentionally. And God did not protect them. He gave them up. In fact, through His prophets, He told them He was going to give them up to captivity and send them into exile. Why? Because of their flagrant disregard for His law, especially the law of the Sabbath, of setting aside a day as special to God. And because they violated this law, God sent them into captivity. When, many, many years later, God also changed world events once again so that they could return to their homeland and reestablish their identity, reestablish Jerusalem, and rebuild the temple. They came back very penitent, very humbled, and now absolutely certain to let that never happen again. Never again would they so flagrantly disregard the law that God had given to them, that they would be sent into exile. And so they actually built a law around the law, this very human law, so that if someone started to violate these human laws, at least they could be stopped before they actually got to violating the law of God.